Rain hammered down on that November night like the world itself was angry. I stood in the driveway, my cardigan soaked through, my hands trembling as I gripped the car keys. The metal was cold and heavy, colder than anything should be, I thought. Behind me, the house glowed warm with lights, and inside those walls, my daughter was silent. My daughter, Clara, who I'd raised, who I'd held through every heartbreak and celebration, was sitting in that living room doing absolutely nothing while her husband told me to sleep in the doghouse. 71 years I'd walked this earth. 71 years of making meals, raising children, loving a good man with everything I had. I'd buried Harold 5 years ago, my best friend, my partner, the only person who truly knew me. And now, standing in the rain like some kind of stray myself, I realized something had shifted inside me. Something quiet and firm, like a lock clicking into place. "Old woman, sleep in the doghouse," he'd said. Travis Henley. My son-in-law. The man who smiled too wide and listened too little. He stood there with a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face flushed with anger over bills he claimed I'd run up, expenses he said I wasn't worth. And Clara, my Clara, just sat there on that beige sofa, eyes fixed on her phone like the words weren't even happening. I'd lived in their house for 2 years. 2 years of giving them money from my savings, of cooking their meals, of folding Travis's expensive shirts and listening to him brag about real estate deals that never quite worked out. 2 years of being helpful, of being part of the family. 2 years of being slowly, quietly erased. The rain continued its assault, soaking through my shoes now. I looked at Patch, the stray dog I'd been feeding on the back porch, and he looked at me with those old, knowing eyes. We understood each other. We were both useful when convenient, invisible the rest of the time. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The car keys in my hand weren't mine. They were Travis's, a spare set I'd found while cleaning his study weeks ago. I'd tucked them into my cardigan pocket without thinking much about it. Now, standing in the rain, I felt their weight like they meant something. I looked at that Lincoln Navigator in the driveway, then back at the house one more time. Through the window, I could see Travis pouring another drink. I could see Clara's profile, still blank, still silent. Something happened in me then. Not anger, I was too old for anger to burn hot anymore. It was something colder and cleaner. It was clarity. Crystal clear understanding that I couldn't stay in a place where my own daughter would let me be humiliated. That I couldn't keep asking people to love me when they'd already shown me exactly what their love was worth. I walked to the car. The keys slid into the ignition smooth as prayer. The engine started, that deep, powerful rumble of an expensive vehicle. And I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the consequences or what people might say or where I'd go. I just drove. The rain blurred the windshield as I pulled out of that driveway, leaving everything behind. 71 years old, $347 in my purse, and one spare set of car keys that suddenly felt like a ticket to somewhere else. As I passed the Millstone County sign in the darkness, a strange feeling washed over me. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing steadied. Home is behind you now, I whispered to myself, and I realized something unexpected. I felt free. Not scared. Not sad. Free. But here's what I didn't know yet as I drove through that November rain. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something. Something that would change everything. He thought he'd locked me out of my own life. He didn't know I still had one key left. Would you have left too, or stayed hoping they'd change? Tell me in the comments below. I want to tell you about the life I had before Travis. The life that made sense, that felt like home, that proved I was worth something to the people I loved most. You need to understand what I lost to understand why I drove into that darkness without looking back. Harold and I bought our cottage in 1978, a little yellow house with white trim and a porch where we'd drink coffee every morning for 43 years. We had that kind of marriage where you didn't always need to talk. We just existed together, and it felt right. He worked at the factory. I raised Clara and made sure our home was the kind of place neighbors wanted to visit. We weren't rich. We were comfortable. And comfortable, I learned, was everything. Harold used to say, "Eve, we've got more than money could ever buy." He meant it too. He meant our daughter's laugh. He meant the garden where I grew tomatoes every summer. He meant Sunday dinners where Clara would tell us about her week, her dreams, the boys she had crushes on. That was wealth to us, time and presence and knowing exactly where we belonged. When Harold died, something in me died too. Not everything. I still woke up. I still made coffee. I still tended that garden. But there was a silence that never quite filled back up. Clara was grown by then, living in the city, building her own life. I didn't want to burden her with my grief. I'd lost my husband, I wasn't going to lose my daughter by making her feel responsible for my sadness. So I lived quietly. I volunteered at church. I attended the ladies' Bible study group. I found small joys in small things, a cardinal on the fence, a good book, my neighbor's grandchildren running through yards. 5 years passed like that. 5 years of being okay, of being alone but not lonely, of having learned that sometimes life is just about getting through the day with grace. Then Clara called. I remember exactly where I was standing, in the kitchen, hands in soapy water, looking out at Harold's garden that was starting to need weeding. Her voice was different. Higher. Almost breathless with excitement. "Mom," she said, "I want you to meet someone." Would you have seen the warning signs, or would you have been swept up in her happiness too?
3 weeks later, I sat across from Travis Henley at a restaurant called the Sterling. Clara had chosen it deliberately, somewhere nice, somewhere that felt important. She held his arm the way she used to hold Harold's when she was little, needing safety and reassurance. Travis was handsome in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. Dark hair, expensive watch, shirt with the cuffs rolled up like he was advertising his sophistication. He had a smile that seemed practiced, like he'd perfected it in a mirror. When he shook my hand, his grip was too firm. He was sending a message. He was in charge. "Evelyn," he said, turning my name into something longer than it needed to be. "Clara's told me so much about you. I have to say, you don't look old enough to be her mother." I'd heard that line before. It was meant as a compliment, but it always felt like something else. It felt like he was cataloging me, deciding if I was worth his effort. I smiled politely. I was already good at doing that. Throughout dinner, I watched him. He ordered the most expensive wine without looking at the price. He talked about real estate deals, about properties he'd flipped, about money he'd made in the market. He talked a lot. Clara laughed at his jokes, or rather, she laughed at the spaces where she thought she should. He barely asked her any questions. "You know what your daughter has that most people don't?" he said to me, pointing his fork in Clara's direction like she was an object on display. "She's got good bones. Not just physically, I mean her family structure, her background. That's solid. That's the foundation of a good investment." He called my daughter an investment. The words came out so casually, so naturally, like he didn't even realize what he'd said. Clara smiled. She actually smiled. And I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "That's an interesting way to describe love," I said quietly. He laughed. "Evelyn, love is what keeps people together when the money runs out. Everything else is just practical." The red flags were waving. They were flapping in my face, practically screaming. But Clara was glowing. She was laughing. She was happy in a way I hadn't seen her in years. And I was just a lonely widow whose own life had become so small that maybe I wasn't the best judge of anything anymore. Maybe I was just old and bitter and couldn't recognize genuine love when I saw it. Later, when we were leaving, Travis put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm going to take really good care of your daughter, Evelyn." You can trust me on that. I nodded. I smiled. But that word, investment, kept echoing in my head. During the drive home, Clara called me from her apartment. Mom, what do you think? Really? He seems very confident, I said, which was the kindest thing I could manage. He knows what he wants, she said. And Mom, he wants me. I wanted to tell her that wanting someone and valuing someone were two completely different things. I wanted to tell her about his cold eyes and his practiced smile and the way he'd reduced her to an asset in a portfolio. But she was happy. She was glowing through that phone line. And I was just lonely enough and old enough and tired enough to keep my mouth shut. Do you believe people show who they are early on, or only when it's too late? Comment and let me know. You need to move in with us, Clara said. It was spring now. 9 months had passed since that dinner at the Sterling, and Travis and Clara had gotten married in a quick ceremony at City Hall. Clara had asked me to come, but there was no bridal gown, no flowers, no family gathering. Just her and Travis and a justice of the peace who looked bored. They'd bought a house, a big, cold modern thing that looked like it was made of glass and steel and the kind of money that didn't mean anything real. It was all corners and no warmth. The furniture was meant to be looked at, not sat on. The kitchen looked like a showroom. You rattle around in that cottage all by yourself, Clara continued. It's too much house for one person. Too much upkeep. Travis sat behind her, silent. But I could see him watching, calculating. My cottage was paid for. That was worth something. That was worth a lot, actually. I love my home, I said. But even as I said it, I felt the foundations shifting. The cottage did feel big. It did feel lonely. And Clara was looking at me with such hope, such need for me to say yes. She wanted her mother close. She wanted to take care of me. What I didn't understand then was that she wasn't offering to take care of me. He was offering to take over. Within 2 months, I'd sold the cottage. The realtor was quick, the paperwork was quick, and I handed the check to Clara with shaking hands. That house had been my sanctuary. It had held 43 years of my marriage, the childhood of my only daughter, countless quiet mornings with Harold. I gave it to Clara because she was my daughter and because I trusted her. The day I closed the cottage door for the last time, I stood alone in the living room. Harold's reading chair was still there. I'd left it behind because I couldn't fit it in the new house, the one where there was no space for memories. I put my hand on that chair and said goodbye to my old life. I said goodbye to the woman I used to be, the one who was certain of her place in the world. Don't be sad, Mom, Clara said, picking me up in her Mercedes. You're going to love living with us. You'll never be alone again. I was already beginning to understand that being surrounded by people could be its own kind of loneliness. The house Travis and Clara had bought was beautiful in the way that frightened me. Everything was too perfect, too clean, too deliberately arranged. There was a guest room for me, separate from everything else, tucked away like a secret. Travis showed me to it himself. We want you to be comfortable, he said, but his tone said something different. It said, this is your space. Stay in it. The first weeks were fine. I cooked. I cleaned. I found my place in their life by making myself useful. Clara was working at a marketing firm. Travis was always out on appointments, always on his phone, always talking about deals and contracts and investments. When he was home, he demanded things, his coffee a certain temperature, his meals without garlic, his evenings quiet so he could think about business. One day, I noticed the kitchen cabinets had locks on them. Real locks, like the kind you'd use on a filing cabinet. What are these? I asked Clara, running my fingers over the metal. Travis's idea, she said, and she wouldn't look at me. He likes to keep track of expenses. He says if we're going to make this work, we need to monitor everything that goes in and out. I opened my mouth to say something, but I closed it again. I was 70 years old and living in someone else's house. I didn't have the ground to stand on to question anything. That night, I heard Travis talking to someone on the phone in his study. Yeah, the old lady's settled in pretty good. She's already handling most of the housework. Her daughter transferred me power of attorney on that cottage sale, so financially speaking, we're in great shape. She won't last forever, if you know what I mean. The sentence hung in the air like a threat. Would you have confronted them, or would you have stayed silent like I did? November came around again. 1 year since I'd moved into their house. 1 year of locked cabinets and cold shoulders and being spoken about like I wasn't in the room. 1 year of watching my daughter become someone I didn't recognize, harder, sharper, more like him. The rain started in the evening. Thunder rolled across the sky like God himself was angry. Travis came home drunk that night, which wasn't unusual anymore. He'd been drinking more. Spending more. I'd overheard conversations about money problems, about deals falling through, about creditors calling. He found me in the kitchen, making dinner. Just me and Patch the stray dog, who'd somehow followed me here from my old life and now spent his days in the backyard, waiting for scraps. "What are you making?" he asked, and his words were slurred. "Chicken and rice," I said quietly. "Clara's favorite." "Clara's not here," he said. "She's working late. It's just you and me, old woman." I kept my hands steady. I kept chopping vegetables. I didn't respond. That was the safest thing to do. "You know what I think?" he said, and he was getting closer. "I think you've been a burden long enough. Eating our food. Using our electricity. Taking up space." My chest tightened. "You want to know what Clara said about you?" he continued. "She said, and I quote, 'Sometimes I wish Mom would just find her own place again.'" That wasn't true. Clara had never said that. But the words hit me anyway because there was a part of me that wondered if maybe they were true. Maybe I was too much. Maybe I'd overstayed my welcome in my own daughter's life. "I've been nothing but good to you," he said. "Let you live here rent-free. And this is the thanks I get? A freeloading mother-in-law." I turned to face him. His face was red. His eyes were empty of anything resembling kindness. He was a man who'd decided I was worthless, and now he was just being honest about it. "You want to know where you belong?" he said, his voice dropping to something meaner. "You belong in the doghouse with Patch. At least he earns his keep by being a guard dog. What do you do? What are you worth?" I set down the knife. My hands had stopped shaking. Something inside me had gone very still, very quiet. This was the moment. This was when I would either disappear completely into their world or disappear from it altogether. "Sleep in the doghouse, old woman," he said. "At least it won't cost me anything." Clara was in the living room. I could hear the television playing, hear her scrolling through her phone. I could hear her choosing not to come into this kitchen. Choosing not to defend me. Choosing silence over her own mother. That was when I felt it, that lock clicking into place. That shift from asking to be loved to deciding I was done asking. I walked to the study. I opened the drawer where Travis kept his keys. My hand reached in. My fingers closed around the spare set to his Lincoln Navigator. The same keys he used to display his status, his success, his power over everyone around him. I thought about Harold. I thought about the cottage with the yellow walls. I thought about Patch waiting by the door, loyal to someone who had nothing to offer but kindness. And then I walked out into the rain. He thought he'd locked me out of my own life. But I still had one key left, and I was about to use it. If someone disrespected your parent like this, what would you do? Tell me in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button for part 2. The Lincoln Navigator moved through the darkness like a ghost. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and for the first time in 2 years, I could breathe. The rain hammered the windshield. The wipers beat their rhythm, back and forth, and it felt like the heartbeat of someone who'd just woken up from being dead. I didn't know where I was going. That was the truth. I had $347 in my purse, a half-tank of gas, and 71 years of a life that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore. But as I drove past the Millstone County sign and the familiar landscape disappeared behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like myself. The highway opened up in front of me. Other cars passed, headed somewhere specific, headed home. But I was the only one headed nowhere at all. The radio played softly, some old country song about starting over, and I almost laughed. The universe has a sense of timing. By midnight, I'd driven past 3 towns. I stopped at a gas station, paid cash, and filled the tank. The attendant didn't look at me twice. I was just an old woman in a borrowed car, and to him, that meant nothing. To the world, I was invisible. And for the first time, I understood that invisibility could be freedom. I drove through the night. My eyes were tired, but my mind was sharp. I thought about Clara, really thought about her, for the first time in a long time. She'd let me be humiliated. She'd sat on that couch while her husband called me worthless. But underneath the anger, there was something else. There was the girl she used to be. The girl who'd held my hand in the grocery store. The girl who'd asked me to braid her hair. That girl was still in there somewhere, buried under years of Travis's manipulation.
By dawn, I'd driven 200 miles. The sun came up over fields I didn't recognize, and I pulled into a small town called Harbor Falls. Population 2,847, according to the sign. It was a place that looked like it had been forgotten by time, old brick buildings, a main street with empty storefronts, a diner with a neon sign that flickered like it was running on hope and habit. I parked the car in a public lot and sat there for a long time. I couldn't keep driving. I couldn't keep running. At some point, the woman who was running had to stop and decide if she wanted to live again. I thought about what I had. A car that wasn't mine. Clothes in a bag. No home. No daughter. No one in this world who knew my name or cared whether I was alive or dead. And then I thought about what I didn't have. I didn't have Travis's voice in my head telling me I was worthless. I didn't have locked kitchen cabinets. I didn't have the weight of being invisible in someone else's home. I didn't have the quiet desperation of waiting for someone to love me. I had my life back. It was small and it was terrifying, but it was mine. That's when I saw the diner. Harbor Diner, the sign said. Through the window, I could see an older man behind the counter, pouring coffee for 2 construction workers. The place was warm and full of light. And there was a help wanted sign taped to the window. Would you have walked in, or would you have kept driving to find another way out? The man's name was Ben Holloway, and he had kind eyes. That was the first thing I noticed. The second thing was that he didn't ask me too many questions. I walked in, soaking wet, tired, desperate, and he just handed me a cup of coffee without saying a word. "Sit," he said. "You look like you've had a long night." I sat at the counter. Around me, the diner hummed with life. The smell of bacon and eggs and strong coffee. The clink of forks on plates. The murmur of conversations between people who belonged somewhere. I felt like I was watching life through glass. Ben came back with a plate of eggs and toast. "On the house," he said. "You look like you could use a meal." I ate because my body needed it, not because I was hungry. When I finished, Ben leaned against the counter and looked at me straight on. "That's my car you're driving, isn't it? The Lincoln out front." My stomach dropped. Of course someone had seen it. Of course this was where it would end, with me arrested for theft, sent back to Clara, sent back to Travis, sent back to being nothing. "It's okay," Ben said, and his voice was gentle. My sister called me from Ohio about an hour ago. She saw the news. Missing woman, stolen vehicle, family drama. She knew it was me, knew I'd help if someone needed helping. She told me to look for you. I didn't understand. Why would she tell you that? Because that's what we do in this family, Ben said. We help people who've been hurt. My sister left her own bad situation 20 years ago. She knows what it looks like. I started to cry then. Not dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that came from somewhere deep inside. Ben didn't try to stop me. He just poured me more coffee and let me fall apart at his counter. When I finally spoke, my voice was hoarse. I took his car. I don't even know why. I just needed to get away, and his keys were there, and you needed to know you could, Ben finished. You needed to prove to yourself that you weren't trapped. That you could make a choice and follow through. Over the next few days, Ben let me stay in a room above the diner. He fed me. He didn't ask for anything in return except honest work. I started helping in the kitchen. Then I started waitressing. Within a week, customers were asking for me by name. Miss Eve, they'd call out. Can I get another coffee from Miss Eve? I became Miss Eve. I became someone again. Someone with a purpose, someone who mattered to the people around her. The diner became my sanctuary in the way that Harold's study used to be, a place where I could be quiet and present and know that I belonged. Ben and I fell into an easy rhythm. He never pushed me. He never asked about my past unless I offered it. He just made sure there was food and coffee and a clean room at the end of the day. He made sure I knew I was safe. One evening, about 3 weeks after I'd arrived, Ben sat down across from me during our quiet hour between lunch and dinner service. I need to tell you something, he said. I need you to know who I am and why I care. He told me about his first wife, who'd been trapped in a bad marriage. How she'd slowly disappeared into it until there was nothing left of the woman he'd married. How he'd watched helplessly as her spirit died while her body still moved through the world. How she'd finally left him, not to be with him, but to save herself. I see her in you, Ben said. I see someone who's decided to live again. And I think that's the bravest thing a person can do. I reached across the table and took his hand. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We both understood that sometimes the greatest kindness is simply witnessing someone else's resurrection. Ever had a moment when life surprised you after loss? Tell me in the comments. It was 3 months later when I found the deposit box key. I was cleaning out my old purse, the one I'd taken from Travis's house that night, and there it was. A small brass key with a number etched into the metal. Below it, in faded ink, were the words, Safe Box, First National Bank. I held that key in my hand for a long time. I didn't recognize it. I'd never seen it before. But as I turned it over, I noticed something else. On the back, in Harold's handwriting, were 3 words, for my Eve. I sat down hard on the bed in my small room above the diner. My heart was racing. Harold had been gone for 5 years. How had this key survived? How had I never seen it before? And most importantly, why? I showed it to Ben that evening. He read the inscription and looked at me with a strange expression, like he knew something I didn't. When did he write this? Ben asked.
I have no idea, I said. I've never seen this before in my life. Then there's only one way to find out what's in that box, Ben said. The next morning, we drove to First National Bank in the next town over. My hands shook as I presented the key to the bank manager. He looked at the number, then looked at me with surprise. You're Evelyn Porter? He asked. Yes, I said. We've been looking for you, he said. We have someone authorized on this account. My mind raced. Was it Clara? Had she somehow found out about the box? Had Travis sent someone? The manager led me to a private room. He opened a safe deposit box, and inside were folders. Lots of them. I opened the first one with trembling fingers. Life insurance. Matured stock certificates. Bonds. A handwritten letter in Harold's careful script that read, "My dearest Eve, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're reading this, it means you needed to be. I've taken care of you. I always will." I wept. I wept like my heart was breaking all over again, but this time it was breaking with love instead of pain. Harold had known. He'd known that the world could be cruel, that people could hurt you, that sometimes you'd need a way out. And so he'd left me this, a gift of freedom hidden in a safe deposit box. The total was substantial. Stock investments that had grown over 5 years. Life insurance payouts. Enough to start over. Enough to never be dependent on anyone again. Enough to prove that I'd been loved, that I'd been worth something, that I'd mattered to at least one person in this world. "What will you do?" the bank manager asked. I looked at Ben through the glass partition of that private room. He was waiting for me, patient and kind. And I knew exactly what I was going to do. Within 2 weeks, Ben and I had purchased a small building on Main Street. We renovated it carefully, kept the bones of the old diner but made it warmer, more welcoming, more alive. We called it Harbor and Hearth. The sign was painted in soft blues and greens. Through the windows, you could see booths with real cushions, walls lined with photographs of customers, a kitchen where food was made with love instead of obligation. Opening day came on a Tuesday in March. The whole town showed up. Miss Eve, they called me. The woman who'd appeared out of nowhere and become part of their community. They didn't know my story. They didn't need to. They just knew that I was good people. That night, Ben took my hand across the counter. "You did it," he said. "You went from sleeping in a car to owning a restaurant." "Harold did it," I said. "From beyond." "Harold gave you the wings," Ben said. "But you learned how to fly." The newspaper ran a small article about the new restaurant. Harbor and Hearth opens with former waitress as co-owner. I kept the clipping tucked above the register. Some days, I'd read it and remember that I wasn't always invisible. Some days, I'd remember that I was worth something. Sometimes karma doesn't need our help, right? Let me know what you think in the comments below. She walked in on a Thursday afternoon when I was wiping down the counter between lunch and dinner service. I knew who it was immediately, not because I recognized her face, but because I recognized the way she moved. The same hesitation I'd seen 1,000 times when she was uncertain about whether she belonged somewhere. Clara. My daughter. Looking smaller than I remembered, thinner, like something inside her had been hollowed out. "Mom," she said, and her voice cracked on the single syllable. I set down my cloth. I didn't run to her. I didn't cry out. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the girl I'd raised underneath the woman she'd become. "Hello, Clara," I said. She walked toward me slowly, like she wasn't sure if I'd turn away. "I've been looking for you for 4 months," she said. "I didn't know where you'd gone. I was so scared something had happened to you." "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine, actually." Ben appeared from the kitchen, taking in the scene. He nodded at me and disappeared again, giving us space. Clara sat at the counter. I poured her a cup of coffee, the way she'd always liked it, with a little cream and no sugar. She wrapped her hands around the mug and didn't drink it. She just held it. "I left him," she said. "After you disappeared, I realized what we'd done. What I'd allowed to happen to you. I couldn't look at myself anymore. So I left. I filed for divorce. I'm staying with a friend right now while I figure out my life." "That took courage," I said. I learned it from you, Clara said, and then she started crying. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. For letting him treat you that way. For choosing his validation over your safety. For being a coward. I came around the counter and pulled my daughter into my arms. She was heavy with guilt and regret, and I held her while she fell apart. I didn't tell her it was okay. It wasn't okay. But I told her something more important. I forgive you, I said. And now you need to forgive yourself. We sat in that booth for hours. She told me about the fights, the manipulation, the way Travis had slowly isolated her from everyone who loved her. How he'd spent her money. How he'd made her feel like she was the problem. How, after I left, she'd realized that everything he'd done to me, he'd been doing to her too. Where were you? She asked. All this time, where have you been? I told her about the car, about Harbor Falls, about Ben. About the deposit box and Harold's gift. About learning how to be myself again. I love you, I said. I never stopped. But I had to leave to prove to you and to myself that I was worth more than being someone's doormat. Clara looked around the restaurant, at the warm lights, the happy customers, the sign that bore my name. You built this, she said. After everything, you built this. I built this with Harold's love and Ben's kindness, I said. But you're right. I built it. And that means I can build my life again too. Before she left that night, Clara hugged me tight. Can I come back? She asked. Can we try again? Yes, I said. But this time, we come back as whole people. Not as people trying to fix each other. Just as people who love each other. Could you forgive someone who chose silence over defending you? Tell me in the comments below. 6 months passed. Clara had gotten a job in Harbor Falls, a good job at a marketing firm in the next town over. She'd rented a small apartment 2 blocks from the restaurant. We saw each other most days. We weren't back where we started, but we were building something new. Something better. The restaurant thrived. People came from neighboring towns just to eat at Harbor and Hearth. The food was good, but the real draw was the atmosphere, the feeling that you were welcomed, that you belonged, that your presence mattered. I made sure of that. I remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and I made sure no one who walked through that door ever felt that way. Ben and I had become something unspoken. Not quite dating, but more than friends. He held my hand sometimes. We'd share a quiet coffee on slow mornings. We didn't talk about the future because we were both learning to live in the present. That was enough. Then, on a cold December afternoon, exactly 1 year to the day since I'd driven away in that Lincoln Navigator, he walked in. Travis. Worn down, weathered, diminished. He was unshaven, his clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in days. He looked like a man who'd been stripped of everything. He looked, I realized, the way I must have looked the night I drove away from his house. He didn't recognize me at first. He just walked to a booth and sat down heavily. I watched him from behind the counter. I could have hidden. I could have sent Clara out to take his order. But something told me I needed to do this myself. I walked over with a menu and a glass of water. I set them both down in front of him. That's when he looked up. That's when recognition flickered across his face, confusion, then shock, then shame. Evelyn, he said, and his voice was small. Hi, Travis, I said. My voice was calm. Steady. Kind, even. You look, he couldn't finish his sentences. His eyes took in the restaurant, the success, the obvious prosperity. He was trying to reconcile the woman he'd told to sleep in the doghouse with the woman standing in front of him now. I need a job, he said finally. His pride was gone. There was nothing left to hide behind. Can you hire me? I heard you owned this place. I'm desperate. Everything fell apart. My business went under. Clara left. I have nowhere to go. I could have said no. I could have walked away and let him experience the exact desperation he'd given to me. I could have been cruel. God knows, he deserved it. Instead, I said, you can start tomorrow. 6 a.m. We make all the soups fresh. I'll teach you. Travis stared at me. Why would you help me? Because, I said, I learned something after I left your house. Revenge doesn't heal anything. But kindness, real kindness, the kind that costs you something, kindness can break people open and let the light back in. The next morning, Travis showed up at 5:50 a.m. He was terrified. He was humbled. He was, for the first time maybe in his whole life, facing the consequences of his actions. I taught him to make soup. We worked in silence most of the time. But one day, about a week in, he said to me, I'm sorry, Evelyn. For all of it. For treating you like you were nothing. I know, I said. And you're going to spend the rest of your life figuring out why you needed to make someone else feel small to feel big yourself. Will Clara forgive me? He asked. Maybe, I said. That's not my decision to make. That's between you and her. But first, you need to forgive yourself. And that's the hard part. That takes time. Travis left the restaurant after 3 months. He'd gotten back on his feet a little, saved some money, got his own apartment, started going to therapy. He came to apologize to Clara one day, and she listened. She didn't take him back. But she didn't hate him anymore either. She just let him go. And me? I kept moving forward. With Ben. With Clara. With the life that Harold had made possible and that I'd had the courage to build. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of this. What wisdom I could share. And I tell them this, you don't need anyone else's validation to know your worth. You don't need anyone else's permission to leave. And you never, ever know what you're capable of until you've been pushed to your absolute limit and decided to rise instead of fall. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well. It's building something beautiful. It's becoming the version of yourself that proves you were always worth something, you just had to remember it. The moral of my story is simple, true justice whispers. Kindness is strength. And peace, real, hard-won peace, that's the best revenge of all. If you believe in quiet justice, in walking away and letting life speak for itself, hit that like button and share this story. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story of resilience, redemption, and the power of starting over. Your love and support mean everything to this family, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? What did you think of Evelyn's journey? Inspire others with your thoughts. See you in the next one.